say without a doubt the scariest movie I've ever seen is The Exorcist. I saw it when I was 22 years old. I still remember how I felt after watching it. And after a few years have gone by since I've watched it, it's amazing that I still can see some of those scenes so vividly in my mind. The makeup artist just did an amazingly impactful, scary job of transforming this 12-year-old girl named Regan in the movie played by Linda Blair into a demonically possessed girl. Although the transformation of Regan as she descends into this demonic possession is indeed terrifying, the real point of the movie seems to me the mother's frantic desire to get help for her daughter. She's rebuffed at every turn, it seems. Psychologists and religious folks don't really believe what's happening until finally she gets two priests to finally show up to try to do what they can to help this poor girl and her mom. Can you imagine what it'd be like to be a parent watching this happen to your child? I would imagine that a number of people who have experienced that is very small. Well, somebody who could relate to what was shown in that movie is a father in our next scripture reading. This is a father who has a boy who is suffering many of the same things that the movie depicted. We're told that this boy was possessed by a demon that was causing him great harm. And as we shall hear, it's not a priest who shows up to help, but a rabbi. Listen now for God's word to you as I share the story in the Gospel of Mark. When they, being Jesus, Peter, James, and John, came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. When the whole crowd saw him, they were immediately overcome with awe, and they ran forward to greet him. He asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought you my son. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. And whenever it seizes him, it dashes him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. And I asked your disciples to cast it out, but they could not do so." He answered them, "You faithless generation, how much longer must I be among you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to Jesus. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it threw the boy into convulsions, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. It has often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you are able to do anything, have pity on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out, "I believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You spirit that keeps this boy from speaking and hearing, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." After crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he was able to stand. When he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" He said to them, "This kind can only come out through prayer." When I was a student at Princeton Seminary, they did not have any courses on how to cast out demons. Exorcism was not something that was taught at the Presbyterian Seminary. And I don't know if it's taught anywhere, really, at least in this country. I've never heard of a course of being taught on how to exorcise a demon. They do teach you lots of useful things, how to preach, how to teach, how to make a hospital call, how to do pastoral counseling. But this kind of ministry has kind of been left behind in the rearview mirror. It's one of the central things, though, that Jesus made sure to teach his 12 followers. We hear these words earlier in Mark's Gospel. It says, calling the 12 to him, Jesus began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits. They drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. So apparently they caught on quickly. He gives them the authority, and a few verses later they're out there knocking these demons, these spirits out of these possessed people, setting them free and healing their bodies. That happens in Mark chapter 6, but here in Mark chapter 9, things go in a decidedly different direction. The earlier sweet smell of success has turned into the sour stench of failure. Just prior to this passage, Jesus had taken 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, up on a mountaintop, and he was, we're told, transfigured before them. He became noticed, revealed in his eternal glory. He shone like white lightning, and they were so awed with him that they had been able to see through the veil, to see the eternal Son of God. And after that experience ends, they go down from the mountain back into the valley where the other 9 disciples were there, as well as, we're told, some other religious leaders called scribes. And when these religious-minded people got together, imagine this, an argument broke out. A debate began. The scribes and the Pharisees and the disciples were at it, trying to figure out, trying to argue some point against each other. Imagine that, if religious folks getting together and having a theological disagreement, having an argument that breaks out. Mark doesn't say what they were arguing about. We don't know the content of it. My guess would be that probably the scribes had witnessed the ineffectiveness of the disciples and were kind of sticking it to them. We don't know for sure. What we do know is that the evil spirit, was unimpressed by the argument. Perhaps he was enjoying it, sitting back, watching these people who believed in God arguing with each other and being completely unable to do anything to make him change his location. The disciples were unable to do anything because arguing is not an effective means of ministry. Probably 20 years later, the Apostle Paul made that same point. In a letter to his first letter to the Corinthians, he writes, he says, my message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith may not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. He was writing to a church in Corinth that loved to argue and debate about theology. There were all kinds of different groups of the church that were arguing about which theology, which teacher was better than the others. And Paul says, when I came to you, I did not join in that game. I came to you not trying to wow you with my words, but to show you the power of God. Why? Because what people really need most of all are not human words, but expressions of divine power. Which is certainly what this father was wanting. He was wanting someone to be able to help his son by using the anointed power of God to help free him. And he had the thought that these disciples of Jesus would be able to do that because there was an expression in the ancient world that says something like, as is the messenger, so is the man himself. That when a teacher had disciples, that they themselves had the same degree of authority that the master had. And so the idea was if the disciples couldn't pull this off, it actually was reflecting poorly on Jesus. He had not done a very good job preparing them to represent himself. And again, they had gotten off to a great start, but not here. Somehow they are completely ineffective, impotent, unable to meet the needs of this boy and the heartache of this father to do something to show forth the goodness and the power of God. And Jesus, as he so often does, shows up at just the right moment. He finds out the disciples can't minister to this boy. So he himself frees the boy from the grip of the Spirit. And when the disciples come to him later and say, "Why were we so ineffective to do what we had been doing earlier?" Jesus says, this kind can only come out through prayer. This kind can only come out through prayer. This kind can only come out when you are truly relying upon God, when you are maintaining a place of deep intimacy with the Father, when your heart and God's heart are in a place of interaction and movement. Only when you stay in a place of being deeply grounded with God. Only when that channel between your core, your spirit, and God's spirit is alive and free can you have the authority, the power to do what this boy needed. Apparently, that free flow between God and the disciples had happened, but here, something got choked off. It might have been that the fact that Jesus took 3 up there, but not 12, and so how would it feel to be one of the 9 left behind? I could imagine pretty easily there would be some resentment, some jealousy. Why only those? Why were we left behind? And I could see some degree of the heart becoming a bit anxious or angry in that. Or perhaps when they were so successful 3 chapters earlier and they were casting out demons, they might have thought, yeah, I'm pretty good at this. It's easy to, I'm sure, to begin to allow some pride to begin to rise up, saying, yeah, look what we can do. Look what I can do. As opposed to look what God is doing through me. It becomes easy, I think, to somehow have the ego get a bit involved. But whatever it is, somehow that channel that they needed opened up fully was closed off. And they are confronted with their own failure and ineffectiveness. Later on, at the end of his life, Jesus is sitting with those same disciples. And he says to them these words. He says, I am the vine, and you are the branches. I'm the vine, you're the branches. If you remain in me, and I in you, if we remain in each other, if there's a mutual indwelling, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, though, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. I am the one, Jesus says, who gives the power, the authority, life, hope. When you are connected to me, when you stay grounded in me, that flows from me through you to a world that needs that. But when you're apart from me, when you dissociate from me, then you become like a withered branch. And disciples that day were like 9 withered branches fanning this evil spirit. The world, Jesus says, does not need withered branches. The world needs the power of God moving amongst it and through the people of God to be able to address the world's deep longings and hurts and wounds. As I think of what's happening right now in our country, I think about these words that the Apostle Paul wrote to the Ephesians. He talks to the Christians in that church community and reminds them of what they were like, where they were before they knew Christ. He's talking to Gentiles who had no understanding of who God was until the gospel was shared with them. And he says, before you knew Christ, he says, you followed the ways of the world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the Spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. I hear Paul's words and I read the story of Jesus here with this boy, and it occurs to me there are spirits that torment little boys, and there are spirits that torment nations. There are much larger spirits, Paul says, that seek to help bring about havoc and violence and destruction, spirits that seek to destroy the image of God in humanity, that seek to destroy this world that God so lovingly created. And I look around our country right now and I wonder if we become possessed by a spirit that is doing to us exactly what that spirit did to that little boy. If we look around our culture right now, doesn't it seem like we as a nation are convulsing? We're foaming at the mouth. We're being convulsed by anger and hatred. We're convulsing because of things that are moving through our national spirit, that are filled with anger, with fear, with hatred and disgust. Are our mouths not foaming with vitriol, scorn, and ridicule? Are we not simply arguing and arguing and arguing these empty, hurtful phrases that are doing nothing to move our nation to a better place? It's like watching our nation with people and leaders arguing about things, unable to do anything really to address the deeper problem, the deeper situation that is at the heart of this nation's spirit. We're watching ourselves being tossed about, thrown into fiery places. And indeed, as that father said, that spirit wanted to destroy that boy. And I'm guessing if we don't find a way out of this, this spirit will indeed destroy our nation, destroy our world. If the emergence of hatred and disdain throughout a culture is not a demonic reality, I'm not sure what is. It certainly has the effect of doing exactly what the evil one would want. And I know that just as arguing would not release that boy, we need something besides angry, argumentative words in our situation. We need, as Jesus said, we need the power of God. We need a power and a force beyond ourselves to help redeem us from our situation. And fortunately, the gospel says that God, knowing that we as a world needed that kind of help, sent help in the person of Jesus Christ. God so loved the world just like our world back then, shrouded in darkness, hatred, violence, empire building, unending warfare, oppression, that God so loved that world that he sent himself to us as Christ, because God knew the world needed something beyond words, something beyond laws, something beyond pep talks. The world needed God. God's presence, God's love, God's goodness. And so Jesus came to allow that divine love to come to our world through him. He was a channel, the one through whom that love came to us. And he said, again, in that last night of his life, he says, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. As the Father's loved me, that same degree of love, now I've loved you with the same reality. It's flowed from God the Father to me, now from me to you. Now you, who have received my love, remain in that love. Love one another as I have loved you. And that seems to me to be, God's entire plan. I'm going to send my love through Christ. Christ will love Christ's people, and Christ's people will love each other in the world. It's going to be this apparatus where divine love will flow from the Father through the Son to the church to the world. That is meant to be the redemptive, constant infilling of a world of darkness and anger that's going to require the reality of divine love to save it. Nothing else, nothing less will work. Dr. King, 50 years ago, he said, hatred cannot drive out hatred. Only love can do that. Hating hatred simply makes hatred stronger. Ridiculing ridicule only makes that stronger. The ways, if we respond in the same energy that we are noticing, it simply makes the spirit stronger, more entrenched. No, it requires someone different. It requires nothing less than the continual infusing of divine love. Our nation will not be turned around by one simple, dramatic exorcism. If it's going to turn around, it's going to happen because the people of God are going to choose every day to stay connected to the vine, to stay in a place where our hearts are continually brought before God and invited by God, before God, to be made clean and pure and healed. It's going to happen if we choose to stay connected to the vine in a way that God's goodness and grace begins to grow and to flow out of us. It's going to happen if we choose in our own heart of hearts to open ourselves up ever more fully to the reality of Christ, that we might then begin to drop into this broken nation's heart and spirit the reality of the divine love that can set it free. These are such extraordinary times. And we have been given such an extraordinary mission. We have been called forth to love as Christ loves, to allow the Father's love to flow in us and through us to the Father's world. We're here today and every day to stay anchored in the beauty and the power and the love of Christ. It is that power, that goodness, and that love that is indeed our hope, the hope of our nation, and the hope of this world. And may we indeed embrace that, cherish that, and live in that grand calling, today, tomorrow, and indeed forevermore.